Well, good morning, and the Subcommittee on Housing, Transportation, and Community Development will come to order. So without a safe, decent, affordable place to live, we know that nothing else in your life works. Not your job, not your education, not your health, not your family, not anything. So if your roof is leaking, or the apartment that you've lived in for years has a big rent increase, or you're having trouble getting around your home as you age, all of these challenges are going to stick with you in every single part of your life. And we know that nearly half of the homes in this country are more than 40 years old. And of those homes and the Americans living in them, as they continue to age, it's important for us to understand that what it will take to keep our homes habitable, affordable, and accessible, both for current residents and for the future. Around the country, around 400,000 apartments that the government helped build years ago in small towns and rural places are on the verge of becoming unaffordable without action by Congress. Our bipartisan rural housing service bill would address that, and I'm so grateful for Senator Lummis for her co-sponsorship of that legislation. That would help to preserve about 9,000 of these affordable units just in Minnesota, where the average tenant income is only about $17,000 a year. So today in this hearing, I am looking forward to hearing about the ways that Pennsylvania has worked to keep up older homes that are in need of repairs. And I believe that the people who know best how to do this are going to be those that are closest to the work. So I know that all of you on this panel will have some really good lessons to share with us. In addition, I'm interested in hearing about how some home modifications have helped to seniors to live in their homes as they age in place. After all, if the installation of a ramp or a lift or an accessible shower can help keep a senior stay independent, then that allows them to lead the life that they choose and helps also to save taxpayer dollars when compared to the cost of a nursing home care, just as one example. So I'm hoping that we can learn a lot today on this hearing. I'm grateful for all of you being here, and I particularly appreciate Senator Lummis's partnership on this hearing. Senator Lummis, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We've been talking a lot in this committee about the need for new homes, but today we're really going to focus on the challenges of ensuring the housing stock we do have remains safe and in use. To catch up and meet the needs in Wyoming, we'll need to build somewhere between 20 and 38,000 housing units this decade. And in Wyoming, that's a lot. Because we're the smallest population in the nation, as you know. And it goes up every time an existing house falls into disrepair and becomes uninhabitable. Home preservation is particularly a problem in rural areas where houses tend to be older and more likely to need major repairs or abandoned. You know, I moved back into the house I grew up in, on the ranch, and the foundation and the basement are made of cinder block, and so getting those French drains set up and all of the exterior work that needed to be done to protect the basement from water leakage was extremely expensive for me. And, you know, I've got nothing to show for it because it's all the kind of expense that is hidden from public view. Our rural homeowners work hard to achieve the American dream, and they're more likely to own their own homes outright. But inflation has made things much more expensive lately, and home repairs and construction costs have just gone up dramatically. So when a major repair is needed, rural homeowners are often unable to obtain the mortgage or home equity line of credit that could fund these projects. Banks and appraisers can be in short supply in rural areas. Heaven knows, I know that firsthand. It's hard to bring an electrician or roofer to your home to make repairs. They're hard to find. When these properties are abandoned by their owners, that's often the end. There's no economic incentive to rehabilitate the homes, and they often aren't replaced either. Right now, I'm trying to repair the little bunkhouse on our ranch. We think it was the first home to prove up a homestead in Wyoming. It has hand-hewn logs on the inside. We've moved it twice, It's covered with concrete, and it's in desperate need of repair, and I'm just starting to repair it. There's no way the cost of repairing would justify the cost of doing it because it's so tiny. This is a labor of love. This is not a labor of good economic sense. And that's true on a lot of rural farms and ranches. So when the properties are abandoned by their owners, that's often the end. They're not usually replaced. So despite the housing shortage, building new homes in a rural area, especially at a price that's affordable to a working family, is just not feasible. Rates are high, and to cover costs means that developers either add more square footage or sell for higher cost per square foot. When it comes to affordable housing, Congress needs to consider the burden of regulation and what we could be doing better. And that's true of local governments as well. Local governments place a tremendous burden on affordable housing with regulations. We know that the high cost of regulations have limited the construction of new homes, but I'd also like to hear today about how we're limiting access of repairs and why existing programs haven't helped as many families as they could. So here's an example. Building codes change over time as building materials and construction techniques evolve. We don't require a home that renovates their kitchen to install sprinklers or widen doorways in other parts of the house, but that can be a requirement when HOME, H-O-M-E, Investment Partnership Program funds are used. Burdens like this limit the number of families that can be helped by these programs. So I'd like to talk today about what changes we need to make so the money the federal government spends on houses goes to support the broadest number of families and is spent efficiently and responsibly. I appreciate the work of Senator Smith and Rounds on the Rural Housing Service Reform Act, and I've partnered with Senator Fetterman on the Whole Homes Repair Act. And I think both of these are small efforts that really will help. But it took decades for our housing challenges to evolve, and fixing them is going to take very different approaches, and different approaches in different parts of the country. So I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your solutions to preserve the housing stock we already have as we work to fix the affordable housing shortage. And Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Senator Lummis. So for witnesses, we're going to now go to witness introductions, and I will turn to Senator Fetterman to introduce Jesse Urgot, and then I will introduce Ms. Wolf, and then Senator Lummis will introduce our last witness. Senator Fetterman.
All right, and thank you to the chairwoman from Minnesota and my colleague from Wyoming. Today, the witness is Jesse Urgot, and he is the president and CEO of Neighbor Works, Northeastern Pennsylvania. This organization is dedicated to creating stable, vibrant communities by providing critical housing assistance, financial guidance, and community development services. A committed advocate, Mr. Urgot has been active on multiple local, state, and national boards and co-founding NeighborWorks Association of Pennsylvania and on the National NeighborWorks Association board. During Mr. Urgot's 16-year tenure in NEPA, he has helped launch their Aging in Place program, numerous blight reduction efforts, and their administration of the Whole Homes Repairs program is in Lackawanna and Waynes counties in my home state. NeighborWorks NEPA's focus is working with communities to ensure access to quality homes, which has a positive effect on neighborhood, community, and region. I'm proud to have him here today, and I look forward to hearing his testimony. And I also want, again, the opportunity to shout out my colleague to Wyoming to supporting this. And I really wanted to talk about what we're really here today. You know, we really have a crisis here in Pennsylvania. and we need a very kind of crisis level kinds of response. And I really want to discuss that the genesis of this, the whole home bill, came from my home state, Pennsylvania. And that was actually championed by my former colleague in the Pennsylvania Senate. His name's Senator Saval, outside of Philadelphia. And on the political side, it's safe to say that Senator Saval is fairly left. Is that accurate, Mr. Urgot? Yeah. And yet, generously, yeah. But yet, even some of the most conservative members of the Pennsylvania Senate all understood and realized the value in this, and they signed on that. And truthfully, that was actually remarkable, particularly as Senator Saval was a first-term senator as well. And I guess that really illuminates just how this is a red county, this is a blue county kind of an issue. And we have a housing crisis regardless of where you are, and this is a very smart way in order to target and allow people to maintain in their homes and remain in dignity as well. So I am grateful to be here to have that conversation, and I turn that over to Mr. Urgot. Question.
Senator Fetterman, we're going to complete the witness introductions, and then we'll go to our testimony. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Robin Davy Wolf, who is the Senior Director for Rural Communities at Enterprise Community Partners, where she leads their housing and economic development strategies, including the provision of direct technical assistance to nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and tribal communities across the nation. Prior to joining Enterprise, Ms. Wolf served as the Deputy Director of Community Resources and Housing Development Corporation, a nonprofit housing developer and service provider with an extensive rural portfolio. She also has worked on the creation of the Colorado Housing Finance Authority Developer's Guide and the Native Housing Developer's Guide. Ms. Wolf resides in Denver and holds a BS in Corporate Communication from the University of Texas, Austin, and an MA in Global Finance, Trade, and Economic Interchange from the University of Denver's Joseph Corbel School of International Studies. And I'll turn now to Senator Lummis for the final introduction.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Smith. I'm pleased to introduce Christopher Volsky, Deputy Executive Director of the Wyoming Community Development Authority. He currently acts as the Chief Operating Officer for the authority with a focus on internal operations, program development, and strategic planning for Wyoming housing policy. He's a fantastic representative of Wyoming with a deep family history in farming and ranching, so he's the right person to be here from Wyoming today. I'm so pleased you can join us. Chris and I look forward to hearing your remarks. Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much. We will now turn to our witnesses for their opening statements. You each ask each of you to keep your testimony to about 5 minutes. There's a clock in front of you to remind you of how much time you have left, and we'll start with Mr. Urgot. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Smith, Ranking Member Lummis, Senator Fetterman, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify this morning on the challenges our nation faces with preserving our housing stock. My name is Jesse Urgot, and I have the privilege of serving as the President and CEO of NeighborWorks Northeastern Pennsylvania, headquartered in the city of Scranton. NeighborWorks Northeastern Pennsylvania was founded over 40 years ago specifically to assist modest-income families who are finding it difficult to obtain financing for home repairs and improvements. Now, over 4 decades later, we serve our neighbors across the region in multiple ways, including homeownership assistance, foreclosure prevention services, comprehensive community development initiatives, aging-in-place programming, and critical home repairs. We've repaired or improved over 1,600 homes to date and have also helped to facilitate numerous community improvement projects addressing blight and neglect in our neighborhoods. All this work has been deeply rooted in our core organizational belief that home is where it all starts. We believe that having a safe, dignified, and stable place to live leads to better health, more financial opportunity, better educational outcomes, and other real benefits for individuals, families, and our community. We've been supported in this work as a longstanding chartered organization in the National NeighborWorks Network and as a proud member of the National NeighborWorks Association. The current housing challenges facing our nation touch all types of communities, urban, suburban, and rural areas alike and span all income levels. The lack of available housing to meet an individual's specific needs can have a ripple effect that negatively impacts regional economies, hampers revitalization efforts by local government, and can ultimately lead to economic stagnation and the deterioration of our neighborhoods. While there are many different concurrent strategies needed to address these challenges, one key element must be the modernization and preservation of as much of our housing as possible. Implementing coordinated and scaled efforts to preserve our existing housing stock is becoming more important than ever. Deteriorating housing stock can be a root cause of other types of community instability and housing insecurity. My testimony speaks to creative efforts taking place in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, including the Pennsylvania Whole Home Repairs Program, to invest in the preservation of our existing housing stock while also addressing the individual needs of our neighbors. With one of the oldest housing stocks in the country, combined with an aging population that also marks us as one of the most elderly states, Pennsylvania can be a fertile testing ground for creative policies and solutions that will benefit the rest of the nation. As homes age and deteriorate, preservation of housing in many communities becomes even more significant due to the nature of the housing itself. Although aging, many homes are irreplaceable, meaning if the units were lost, they either could not or would not be replaced because of a lack of economic incentive to build new single-family units in those communities. Likewise, when there's extensive deferred maintenance, there can be little to no economic incentive for investors to purchase these homes in many markets. Pennsylvania's Whole Home Repairs Program has been a critical new tool in our state and region to address this challenge. While other state and federal resources have been available for decades to address housing preservation, we have found many to be very challenging to use on the front lines. These programs tend to be broad in their potential uses, but burdensome in implementation and difficult to leverage with other resources. By contrast, the Whole Home Repairs Program is specific in its intended use and very flexible in its practical implementation. We currently manage approximately $1.2 million in whole home repair funding for 2 counties in our footprint, which has helped us to leverage and stretch another $3.5 million in federal, state, and private investment into our Aging in Place program and home repair work. This ability to leverage, layer, and unlock other funds has been critical. For example, our partners at a local community action agency have used the funds to great effect to address a large deferral list for their weatherization program. And at NeighborWorks, we can layer whole home repairs funding with other federal resources, including HUD's Older Adult Home Modification Program and funding from the Administration for Community Living. The flexibility of this program also extends to the way it is administered, which can be tailored at the municipal and county levels to meet the most pressing needs of local communities and residents. Advancing programs like the Whole Home Repairs Act will be an important next step in providing scaled investment and preserving our nation's housing stock. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic. I look forward to answering any questions the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Urgot. We'll now turn to Robin Davy-Wolf. Thank you.
Chair Smith, Ranking Member Lummis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Robin Davy-Wolf, and I'm the Senior Director of Rural Communities at Enterprise Community Partners, where I work to lift up and support the needs of rural housing developers, providers, and residents across the country. Before joining Enterprise, I worked as an affordable housing developer, serving rural communities across the state of Colorado with programs for renters and homeowners. It was through this work I first became familiar with the unique challenges of preserving and developing affordable housing in rural communities, places where we often struggle to meet economies of scale and where resources develop are more scarce. Communities across the country are losing affordable housing supply faster than new homes can be developed. Targeted resources, programs, and policies are critical to maintain the existing affordability of multifamily properties. Because once affordable units are lost, they are difficult and cost prohibitive to replace. At Enterprise, my team and I focus a great deal on the preservation of USDA Section 515 housing stock, supporting affordable housing providers across the country as they work to preserve homes at great risk of losing affordability. This program, which houses approximately 400,000 low-income rural renters, is projected to lose up to 137,000 units over the next 10 years. Much of this housing was developed 50 years ago, is in danger of losing its rental assistance, and needs significant repair. Each week, my team and I receive new inquiries from nonprofits and housing authorities and local leaders who want to preserve the 515 properties in their communities, but who are struggling to understand the best way to recapitalize the housing and to fund the needed repairs and improvements. I want to thank the subcommittee and the full banking committee for the work that has been done to address housing preservation, including the Whole Home Repairs Act introduced by Senators Fetterman and Lummis, which is being discussed today. I also want to thank Senators Smith and Rounds for their work on the Rural Housing Service Reform Act, which would give property owners at 515 and prospective buyers of those properties the flexibility to keep this housing affordable and in good condition. That said, additional resources still must be leveraged to preserve all units at risk. And the need for affordability preservation extends beyond currently subsidized housing stock. In rural and urban communities alike, market pressures and disinvestment pose significant threats to existing affordable housing. As I discuss in my written testimony, a full ecosystem of funding types is needed. We must expand and modernize programs that are already in place, such as the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, the HOME program, and the Indian Housing Block Grant program. There are also newly proposed programs that would be helpful in preserving and expanding the housing supply. Chairman Brown has introduced several pieces of legislation that would further facilitate housing preservation: the Housing Supply Fund Act, the Affordable Housing Preservation and Protection Act, and the Yes in God's Backyard Act, which promotes faith-based development. We are rapidly losing affordable units, and there is a profound need for directed tools, resources, and policies to mitigate and prevent the loss. Affordable housing helps households avoid housing cost burden and contributes to housing stability, creating positive outcomes that can last for generations. Simply put, we cannot build our way out of our housing crisis. Preservation of affordable housing is necessary to address the critical lack of affordable housing supply. Preservation is faster and more cost-effective than new construction. It also provides housing stability and prevents displacement of existing residents, homeowners, and renters alike. For this reason, the inclusion of home ownership and home repair in the preservation conversation is very important and appreciated. The need for single-family home repair is especially true in rural communities, where we see higher rates of home ownership and homes in need of significant repair. Housing preservation is a critical component of Enterprise's strategy to connect low-income households to opportunity, from our home repair programs in Detroit and Cleveland to our rural multifamily preservation work and our housing resilience programs. Enterprise works with nonprofits, developers, local governments, landlords, and homeowners to improve financial health, resiliency, and sustainability of homes. I'm appreciative of the opportunity to share my experiences and perspectives today. On behalf of Enterprise, I would like to thank the subcommittee, especially Chair Smith and Ranking Member Lummis, for their leadership on rural and tribal housing issues, as well as their bipartisan cooperation on issues that affect so many Americans in every corner of the country. I hope the conversations we have today will bring more attention to the needs surrounding housing preservation and home repair, and that together we can make home and community places of pride, power, and belonging for all.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And now we'll turn to Mr. Volsky.
Chair Smith, Ranking Member Lummis, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the challenges in preserving the U.S. housing stock. I'm Christopher Volsky, Deputy Executive Director of the Wyoming Community Development Authority. Since 1975, the WCDA has been championing affordable housing in Wyoming. WCDA was created as an instrumentality of the state, though we receive no state funding for our programs. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak about housing, and specifically from a rural housing lens. My written testimony, which your offices have a copy of, includes more specifics regarding inventory, data elements, programmatic examples, and legislative consideration. However, due to time constraints, I'll focus my verbal testimony on Wyoming and rural America in general. That's more of my wheelhouse anyway. I've not only spent most of my career in the housing space, but have lived exclusively in rural states: South Dakota, Southwest Minnesota, and Wyoming. I'm from a fifth-generation farming and ranching family and had a high school graduating class of 16. You could say I've not only worked in rural housing, I've lived it. Our nation's stock for ownership housing is aging. As homes get older, they require necessary repairs and upgrades to remain habitable. Unfortunately, many working families have trouble accessing affordable financing to pay for such projects. I applaud Ranking Member Lummis for acting to tackle this issue when you introduced with Senator Fetterman the Whole Homes Repair Act, which would establish a repair grant program for low and moderate income homeowners. One of the most important federal resources we have for rental preservation is the Home Investment Partnerships Program. This is why I want to thank Senator Cortez Masto for introducing the Home Investment Partnerships Program Reauthorization and Improvement Act, which would make a number of changes to home. Moving to a more local perspective, the state of housing in Wyoming is complex, it's expensive, and it's lacking. The WCDA recently published a statewide housing needs assessment. It's a lengthy report, 300 pages, which I feel further illustrates the point that this is not a problem we solve with one silver bullet. Or rather, it's a complex set of dials, each needing to be adjusted so we can collectively bring about change. The median household income in Wyoming cannot afford the median home value in every county. The situation's no better if you rent. 38% are cost burdened per HUD, meaning that in many cases, renters are spending close to half of their net pay on housing. From a demographic perspective, the population of Wyoming is aging. Our fastest growing age group is 65 plus, and expected to increase another 40% by 2030. Not only is our population aging, but housing stock in Wyoming includes 32% of inventory built over 50 years ago, that's pre-1970, and 66% built prior to 1990. They need new roofs, furnaces, and windows. Additionally, the needs of the owner may have changed, and conditions for accessibility and a needed upgrade for homeowners to age in place. As we transition to the discussion around rural capacity, especially those isolated from major cities, they face difficulties accessing the technical expertise and incur high costs for material transport, making it challenging to attract developers due to their small-scale housing needs. A city manager, a clerk, even a mayor can be part-time positions while they work their full-time career outside of city administration, and this creates a barrier for rural municipalities to fully participate in the process when programs become available. I also touched on community banking needs to assist rural populations in my written testimony. I mentioned the Whole Homes Repair Act earlier. I don't need to look any farther than central Wyoming to imagine the impact. Mills, Wyoming is one of the top 20 cities in Wyoming in terms of population. The city has a bit over 4,000 residents. And yes, you heard that correctly. 4,000 residents will get you in the top 20 in Wyoming. We're talking about rural Wyoming after all. At the same time, Mills is in the bottom 20% for income. The median household income is barely above $44,000, and that's household, that's not individual. The city has an old housing stock with 69% of its households built prior to 1990. We must invest in transforming the housing stock we have rather than losing it to obsolescence. In rural America, we pride ourselves in pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps and lending a helping hand when needed. We look to embrace the challenges posed by our aging single-family housing stock and solving the rental affordability for the future. I'd be remiss if I didn't take a few moments to thank our allies in Wyoming and here in DC for your willingness to engage in this conversation and partner on solutions. I would also like to specifically thank my team back at the WCDA. You show up every day, you put in the hard work that makes real-life impacts for your fellow Wyomingites. Be proud, and thank you. Finally, I'd like to close with a quote from a recent post of Governor Gordon's team. The world needs more cowboys and cowgirls. And in Wyoming, we need more housing for our cowboys and cowgirls. Thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for your excellent testimony. We'll now turn to a round of questions from my colleagues, and I will begin with Senator Fetterman.
Oh, I defer to the, either one, please.
Okay. All right, well then, in that case, I'd be happy to start. Thank you again very much for your testimony. And I'd like to I'm going to start with you, Mr. Urgot. A couple of years ago, HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge came to Minneapolis, and we had an opportunity to visit with some homeowners in the older adult home modification program. It was really great to see firsthand how a little bit of assistance making that house that they had lived in for years and years and years work for them as they were in their 60s and 70s, just what a difference it made in their lives. Just simple modifications like grab bars or a ramp to make a shower accessible were just a huge change. So could you talk a little bit about the intent of this program, how it fits with other things that your organization does, and what in particular you think Congress could do to make this grant funding work better for communities and families?
Thank you for your question. The older adult home modification program has really been a significant opportunity for organizations and communities who are seeking to help seniors age in place safely and with dignity. As you mentioned, things like grab bars, accessible bathrooms, wheelchair ramps really can be a game changer in keeping seniors in their homes for as long as they want to live there. Some of the challenges with the programs are sometimes its limit, funding. So if you can only do about $5,000 worth of modifications with that, it can take care of a lot of great smaller needs, like we mentioned. But if you're modifying a bathroom or adding a grab bar and the roof is leaking, it still doesn't stabilize that older adult in their home, which is why programs like the Whole Home Repairs Act can provide that kind of additional leverage for those funds.
I see what you're saying. So if it's $5,000 and you got to come up with $15,000, and how do you come up with the other 10? And how do you see those two programs working together if we were, when we were successful in passing Senator Fetterman and Senator Lummis's bill?
Well, we can attest that they work very well together. When we have, for example, a home that needs that $15,000 worth of various repairs, so it might need some kind of accessibility improvements. It might need a new furnace. It might even need a wheelchair ramp. You can really be creative with how you layer those funds together from those two programs and others, frankly, to kind of accomplish the whole need of that home to keep that homeowner in their home safely and with dignity.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wolf, I'd like to ask you a bit about tribal housing. Senator Lummis and I have both made tribal housing a real priority in this subcommittee, and we also know that there are significant challenges with housing stock on tribal lands where we see properties that are 4 times more likely to have major physical deficiencies, like even things as basic as plumbing and heating just not working at all. So could you talk a bit about those challenges and what you think we should be doing to address that uniquely in Indian country?
Certainly. I think this enterprise is really committed to serving tribal nations. You've met with my colleague, Tanya Plummer, also, who talks a lot about this and is an enrolled tribal member herself, and who gives our team tremendous perspective and cultural awareness as we enter into working on tribal housing. Really, biggest challenges with getting federal resources out to tribal communities. Partly, many of them are coming through state agencies, and there are a lot of requirements related to how those dollars go out and related to things on the back end, such as recapture, that are sometimes in conflict with tribal sovereignty, to be frank. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you see those as primarily federal law challenges or state law challenges or a mix?
I really do think it's a mix. I think it's partly how states deploy federal dollars, right? And how they underwrite those dollars, what additional requirements, as Senator Lummis was talking about, sort of additional requirements that come with dollars. States can tack on additional requirements if you're going to use their home dollars, for example. Also, remember, tribal nations are generally rural communities, so they're not entitlement communities de facto. Right. And so they have to work through additional agencies in order to access these dollars. The way that that's not true is through programs like the Indian Housing Block Grant, and which is a tremendous program, but we've been talking about how a suite of resources is necessary to layer and leverage together. And when you're focused on only one set of dollars, then tribal homes are not getting access to that full capital stack.
Right.
And so I think this has really been the challenge that we're facing. I'm excited to have other resources come to the table. The real key is flexibility with how those resources are deployed, and that those resources are sensitive to tribal sovereignty.
I really appreciate that point very much, and I also just have to acknowledge that we have been waiting to reauthorize NHASDA for since 2013.
Yes.
And so a source of great frustration for me and others I know. Lots to talk about, but I will turn now to Senator Lummis.
Oh, thank you, Chairwoman. This is a question for all witnesses. Some federal programs like CDBG or NHASDA, which is that federal block grant program for tribal housing, can be used for repairs and rehab, but in practice, they're not. So can you talk about why in practice it's hard to spend CDBG or home funds on rehabilitation and repairs? Mr. Urgot, would you like to begin?
Sure. No, I think that's a very relevant question to all the challenges that we see locally, specifically in the home program, which we administered for the city of Scranton for many years. Some of the challenges we are running into is that when you use a home dollar to start to repair a home, you have to take care of all of the necessary issues in that home, no matter if it's $5,000 or $50,000. And the challenge is, with matching and leveraging those dollars is very difficult. And so you're stuck with trying to put a significant amount of dollars. When you look at our homes in northeastern Pennsylvania, there are many needs, and it's rare that you have a small price tag on that total renovation cost. And so you can use a lot of funds on very few properties. And so it's one of the reasons that we started to back away from using that program, frankly. And I know in Pennsylvania, only about 25% of home funds are actually used for home repairs. That's a stat we have from the state. And that just kind of speaks to the fact that they're just difficult to implement and layer with other types of funding.
Thank you. Ms. Davy-Wolf?
Yeah, I think this is a particularly interesting question for rural communities because they do not get direct entitlement allocations of home and CDBG. So in that effect, they are also just harder to access. Again, you're having to navigate another, it depends on home or CDBG, the process for navigating them. There's a tremendous amount of administrative hoops you have to jump through in order to access those dollars for rural communities. I also want to point out that they're really just critically underfunded resources, and so there is a lot of demands for those funds. CDBG has been flat funded since fiscal year 2022, and home has received a $250 million cut in the FY24. So I think that part of it is just there's not enough of those funds to leverage in, and home repair doesn't end up being really the priority for that. We do see home dollars going into multifamily rehab often, and it does work. It can work in communities that have USDA housing stock. Home can be part of that rehabilitation and repair. Again, sometimes there's additional hoops that need to be jumped through. Sometimes there's misunderstanding of whether or not you can use HUD dollars in a USDA program. They are allowed to be leveraged, but often that's also where the technical assistance comes in about helping those agencies that are on the ground to navigate how to layer those resources together.
Do you ever see something like Habitat for Humanity go in on some of these projects, and does that help you utilize home funds, or is it irrelevant?
Sure. So I live in Denver, Colorado. We have a very strong Habitat affiliate in Denver, and Habitat uses a lot of federal resources for their programs and leverages them into home repair and into home ownership, and it does help those dollars stretch because Habitat has a tremendous amount of fundraised resources as well, and so it's a significant source of leverage for those programs.
Thank you. Same question, same last two questions for you, Christopher, but I want to point out something interesting to you. Fort Fetterman in Wyoming is very famous fort, involved in the Bozeman Trail, very historic fort. It turns out in conversation with Senator Fetterman, he is related to Wyoming's Fort Fetterman.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so very historic. No, there you go. Anyway, Mr. Volsky.
Thank you for the question. So I'm going to focus mainly on CDBG. We've had some testimony here on home already. So CDBG, I like to call it a little bit of a sticky widget for the municipalities. It's a great program. It's very flexible as far as what we can usually do. At the same time, it can be complicated for small municipalities to do correctly. As the state allocating agency for CDBG, we only have one entitlement community, that's Cheyenne. Otherwise, everything else has to go through the WCDA. What you normally find in these communities is they want to deploy those funds because it's a limited resource for larger community impacts. We've seen a lot of water and sewer. And I think, sometimes people may think, well, it's water and sewer, isn't that already set up? I mean, I think we have to remember, the real nature of Wyoming, we have the population smaller than what's in interior DC. We're less than 600,000 people, yet we have the square footage, or mileage, so to say, of the size of Germany. So you've got, you have to stretch those infrastructure dollars fairly far, they're pocketed, and for a municipality to bite off and do a CDBG program that's going to be a home repair style, it's an administrative burden. The only community I'm aware that has actually tried that and accomplished it, this was years ago, was Casper. And they've since backed away from that, and we're doing other programs with Casper, but more on not on a home repair. So I just don't know if CDBG and home repairs are a good match, hence the reason the whole Home Repairs Act seems to be a better deployment of those dollars. Regards to your second question on Habitat for Humanity, we do deploy these funds in CDBG to units of local government. So local government would have to sponsor, say, this Habitat for Humanity to do that. I haven't necessarily seen that happen here in Wyoming. We'd be happy to see, do that if there's the ability to do that. But once again, we kind of comes down to a capacity thing, and with the amount of municipalities coming in for the money. So,
Thanks, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you so much. Senator Tester.
I want to thank the chair and ranking member for having this hearing. It's very, very important. I also want to thank the panelists for being here. Sometimes we have hearings and the panelists are great, but they're not panelists that actually have solutions. I think all three of you have solutions, and I want to commend both the chairman and the ranking member for having the folks here that are here. Look, housing is a big issue everywhere. It's a big issue in Montana. Communities of all sizes. In many areas, there aren't houses available, and if there are houses available, nobody can afford to buy them that makes a reasonable wage. In some of our more rural communities, housing is not fit to live in unless it's rehabbed. It's the first thing I hear about when I talk to Main Street businesses. We just had a sawmill shut down in Montana, and this is just one example of many. And the reason they shut down, lack of workforce, lack of housing, even if they had the workforce. So if we're going to have an economy and communities that are vibrant, both of them, I think we need to get the Rural Housing Service Reform Act passed, something that Senator Smith and Senator Rounds both have been working on, because our rural communities have significant housing needs. I think our urban communities do too. But the bottom line is, if we're going to get housing and tract in rural America, this is one step in the right direction. So, Ms. Wolf, could you just let me know, as concisely as you can, more concisely than I just said, how this bill will make sure that we preserve housing in rural areas so that those communities can continue to grow?
Sure. Thank you, Senator Tester, for your question. Enterprise supports the Rural Housing Service Reform Act, which is led by Senators Smith and Rounds and is supported by the majority of the committee. This legislation is going to make long overdue updates to RHS programs that are really needed, including allowing Section 521 rental assistance to continue at properties where the USDA mortgage expires. Right now, that's a big concern because we have a tie of that rental assistance to the mortgage on the property. We have many mortgages. The peak starts in 2028, but we are already right now on the cusp of losing a tremendous amount of housing to just mortgage maturity. And with that housing stock, we are also going to lose rental assistance. So I'm really excited about the conversations around decoupling that are included. It's also going to help leverage housing credits and debt to recapitalize the properties while ensuring that the tenants can continue to be stably housed. It allows for different resources to come in. This is super important since there are around 400,000 units of Section 515 housing remaining. On the single-family side, the bill would also build off the successes using the Section 502 directory lending program for Native communities, which we're very much in support of as well, and make important updates to USDA's home repair loan limits, which I think could really be leveraged by the Home Repairs Act and other sources such as that. So all really important to have that RHS Reform Act put in place.
Thank you. Mr. Urget, manufactured homes have long been widely utilized option for affordability in Montana. Recent years, we've seen out-of-state investors come in and buy manufactured home communities. They start with adding fees, and then they jack up rent. And all of a sudden, those affordable housing options aren't so affordable anymore. And quite honestly, the people they're putting at risk don't have a lot of options, period. So what tools do we have to keep the big national investors from buying up, whether it be in Montana or any other state, buying up these manufactured home communities, eliminating the only affordable option for many of the hardworking families and for Montana seniors? What can we do about that?
So thank you, Senator Tester. We, in northeastern Pennsylvania, it's not one of our primary areas of expertise or work, but what I do know is that many across our network and the National Labor Works Network are helping to try to organize local mobile home parks, manufactured home parks, to purchase ownership themselves. And so finding ways, I think, to empower the folks who live in those homes and enable them to find their own local solutions to ownership is a way to control some of that before the out-of-town investors come in.
Thank you. Mr. Volsky, I do not have a question for you at this moment in time, but I appreciate you being here. Your description of what's going on in Wyoming versus Washington, D.C. is a pretty damn good description of why one-size-fits-all policies don't work in Washington, D.C., because the distance issue in a state like Wyoming, our good neighbor to the south, is just a killer in rural America. So if we don't take that into account, it becomes a problem. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Fetterman.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Volsky, strange as it might sound, but I've spent a lot of time in Wyoming, and I know that a town about 4,000 size is meaningful and a big deal in Wyoming. In fact, I was a mayor of a town of roughly that size as well, so I understand that. So let me ask you a question. Do you have leaky roofs in Wyoming?
Yes, I'd say there's leaky roofs across the state.
Do furnaces break down?
Unfortunately, the mechanics also break down in Wyoming, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, we need to confirm. Mr. Ergot, do roofs leak in Pennsylvania?
Senator, many roofs leak in Pennsylvania, yes.
And furnaces, do they break down?
Often, yeah.
Well, that's and in my community in Western Pennsylvania, they do, and this is the kind of a bill that it can address to those kinds of a thing. And it's also that once a roof is breached, and now the home is allowed to deteriorate and become uninhabitable. And then that becomes abandoned, and that creates all kinds of other costs as well. And it's not very cheap to actually demolish them. And that's a significant issue in my community as right now. For every abandoned home, that becomes a $20,000 to $25,000 IOU to demolish. And that's one less home for someone to live in. And this is the kind of bill that can address that with the kind of flexibilities of that. Have any of you, when you are providing some kind of service, did you ever ask them, who are you voting for or what are your political beliefs are? No. So it's really agnostic to politics or red or blue counties. It's just something for all of us, for Americans, that they have these kinds of very common issues, and it allows them that typically skew more elderly, and they just want to remain in dignity and this kind of security of living in their home. Is that accurate? Seems pretty reasonable as well. And also when you often deal with the government, things can be less inefficient then. But this is the kind of flexibility that allows those things to directly as well. Is that accurate? Flexibility can be helpful in that, right? And it addressed these very specific kinds of a thing. And it is undeniable that making someone's bathroom more comfortable or usable means, or bars and things, that's helpful. But to that point earlier, it's like you can't live with a better bathroom if you can't heat your house, or it's leaking and it makes it there. So this really is that. And this also allows that if you are forced to leave your home, that cannot preserve any kind of wealth or anything as well. So this undermines a lot of different things as well. And this was born in a senator from Pennsylvania in a very, very blue liberal, and that was embraced by a very, very conservative members of my former chamber in Pennsylvania. And now as politics become more and more, divisive and everything, it's encouraging to have something like this. We can come together and acknowledge that we want to serve everyone, and allows them to provide elderly to live in dignity, and to preserve our housing stock, and remind everybody that, as what my colleague from Montana pointed out, that we need kind of solutions like that. So I want to thank all of you on what that your works do and how important that is. Small town where I live in right now, regardless of where in this nation, this is the kind of bill that can address that and allow people to live in dignity and to preserve our housing stock in a nation that is now faced with a significant housing crisis. So I want to thank you for coming here and joining us today. And I turn back to our chairwoman.
Thank you so much, Senator Fetterman, and thanks for your work on this legislation. I believe that Senator Cortez Masto will be joining us shortly, but in the meantime, I'll turn to Senator Lummis if you have any additional follow-up questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. A quick question for Mr. Volsky. We talked earlier about CDBG and home, so now I'd like to turn to CDFIs. What are some of the reasons that banks and even community-focused lenders like CDFIs have not been able to provide sufficient financing for needed repairs and rehab in rural areas?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Lummis. I think it's a very interesting piece of this particular equation, because you would think we have a financing mechanism out there. Why can't these people just go get some loans from their local bank and solve this, right? Well, the fact of the matter is, banks have a different profile. They're looking at the credit and they're looking at that risk profile, whether that's a national bank or even a community bank. So, they're governed to make sure that the risk they're putting out there, whether it's a cash out refi, whether it's a HELOC, that person has the ability to repay. Unfortunately, if you've got a 540 FICO and a 45% debt ratio, you may not qualify for any bank financing, but that doesn't make your leaking roof go away, right? So that's kind of the impact of the people that we're trying to help through, say, the Home Homes Repair Act bill, right? You're capturing the folks that don't have access to credit. Even though folks that do have access to credit, typically, especially in a rural area, it's going to be more expensive. By way of example, I know a couple who recently, the wife became wheelchair bound, and they needed to do some accessibility modifications to the kitchen and ramps and et cetera. They needed about $20,000. They go and do a cash out refi. Most banks are going to sell that in the secondary market to Fannie or Freddie. You now have got to find a appraiser. The nearest appraiser is a 3-hour round trip. Yeah. You got the cost of that coming in, and then also just the cost of doing that loan. That $20,000 suddenly became like $23,000 or $24,000 just for the origination fees on it. Right. So even if you've got the ability to, it can be very costly. CDFIs, I think in certain states, they're very robust, and they can be a more nuanced approach. Unfortunately, in other areas of the country, you have very few CDFIs. I'm only personally aware of one in the state of Wyoming. There may be some others that I haven't ran into, but we've only interacted with one here in Wyoming.
Is that the one on the reservation?
It is, yes, thank you. Yeah, so that's the only CDFI I'm aware of in the entire state of Wyoming. So that's also a little more nuanced and not going to solve our statewide problems. So you've kind of got this dual-edged thing of community lending, whether it's accessible in the cost, and then the CDFI piece it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Okay. Thank you so much. I note that we've been joined by our colleague, Senator Cortez Masto, so I will yield additional time to her.
Thank you, Senator Lummis.
Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. And I have to thank both the chair and ranking member for their continued focus on really addressing affordable housing needs. So thank you so much. It is an issue in Nevada. I've been working on to address affordable housing needs. So, Mr. Volsky, let me ask you, this is regarding the Home Investment Partnerships program. I have a piece of legislation that reauthorizes the legislation. It's S3793. But can you do me a favor? Why is the home program so important to our ability to invest in affordable housing, construction, and preservation? Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. For us, home is one of the most used programs we have for rental rehabilitation and rental creation. That's primarily how we use that program in Wyoming. It's got some other flexibilities that could be used for other items, but quite honestly, we've never quite cracked the code on how to do that for single-family development and rehab. This little scattershot other states will use that. Some states, for their single-family piece, will use it for down payment assistance. We roll that into our mortgage revenue bonds, and we finance those, so we don't want to take home dollars and use them for something that I can solve in a different way. So really, it's one of the main tools to help create inventory and rehab inventory that otherwise the private market, isn't doing 50% AMI units. So it's a good tool.
And that's what I hear in Nevada as well. And that's why, for me, this piece of legislation is so important, not just in Nevada, but as you identified in Wyoming and other communities as well. And I'd hope all of my colleagues join me in this legislation. Let me touch on something else as well. And it's the mortgage revenue bond and mortgage credit certificate programs. Again, there's a piece of legislation that I have focused in this space. And again, Mr. Volsky, let me ask you this. How do state housing finance agencies use the mortgage revenue bond and mortgage credit certificate to improve middle-class families' ability to buy homes?
Yeah, so in Wyoming, the mortgage revenue bonds is really our bread and butter for how we finance what we call our first-time homebuyer program. And that's, I think, what most people in Wyoming recognize. And they see WCD an acronym, they think first-time homebuyers. Those tax-exempt bonds allow us a lower cost of issuance, and then we're allowed to pass that savings on to prospective home buyers that are trying to buy. It kind of depends on the market, but a lot of times, especially with the rates being higher, we get actually a better competitive advantage in the tax-exempt revenue space. So we could be sometimes up to a point lower, and a point lower on a 30-year mortgage for a first-time home buyer can sometimes be the difference between whether they qualify to buy a home or whether they're still in the rental space. So opening equity and the ability for them to share in wealth creation.
And this is in my legislation, but why is it essential to increase the mortgage revenue bond and home improvement loan limit from $15,000 to $50,000?
Yeah, so that's a piece of the legislation that would allow for rehabilitation work, and it hasn't been adjusted, from my understanding, in decades. And I think we've heard plenty of testimony here that $15,000 is most likely not going to create the necessary rehabilitation pieces, or maybe it'll address one of the rehabilitation pieces, but not holistically. So I think it's a more all-in number that allows a homeowner to properly get their house ready for the next 10 years, 20 years.
And thank you. And again, legislation that actually Senator Cassidy and I introduced, the Affordable Housing Bond Enhancement Act, really focuses on all these issues that we're hearing about. We've heard from our housing communities. How do we address this? How do we bring affordable housing? We know that at the end of the day, putting together affordable housing is cobbling financing together. It is not easy. You need people that understand it, but we also need those programs that we can rely on to help address and bring in that financing. So that is key for all of us. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity, as I bounce around between committee hearings this morning, to come in and talk about this important issue.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Lummis.
Yeah, this question is for you, Madam Chairwoman, and I'm glad you came. It seems like we're getting good momentum, good feedback, good validation for these bills from a variety of panels and witnesses. What do you think are the chances that we can put together sort of a package of housing bills and bring them to the full banking committee and get a vote and get these bills moving before the end of the calendar year? I know we don't have a surprisingly few number of days on the Senate calendar that are available for things other than, budgets and the big stuff. But these bills seem to have so much use case has been established. The bills have good support. What are the chances?
Well, thank you for that, Senator Lummis. And I agree with you that there are a group of bills that are defined by being really focused on solutions to problems and that are bipartisan. And I know that the chair is very interested in moving forward a set of bills that would allow us to take action. Not only on the Rural Housing Service Bill, but on many of these other bills that have bipartisan support and that are within the jurisdiction of this committee. And so I think all of the members of this committee should give that message to both the chair and the ranking member that we think it would be really valuable to do a markup and to move them forward.
Thank you. I will make a point of doing that with the ranking member. I know housing has always been a high priority of his
Yes.
on this committee. So I think we're in a decent position to, rattle some cages around here. Thank you.
I think we could make real headway. I
Thanks
appreciate
very
that.
much, Madam Chairwoman.
I have just one follow-up question, and then I think we'll be ready to conclude unless any of my colleagues have other questions. Ms. Wolf, when I was asking you about tribal housing issues, you noted that a lack of understanding of tribal sovereignty is often a barrier for program implementation, both at the federal and the state level. And I wanted you just to elaborate on that a bit and explain to us where that breakdown is. I note that in federal policy, there is frequently a challenge with federal agencies not always grasping how tribal sovereignty affects the way that these programs are implemented.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I want to say I'm still a learner about this as well. And I've had the privilege to support our Tribal Nations team through a deployment of technical assistance, primarily in the state of California last year, as they were working to leverage state resources into tribal housing. But again, I continue to learn, and as we're all learning about this matter. And each tribal nation is different, and it's a different government. It's its own government, and we have to think about it as government-to-government relations. And I think that's just something different for many of us to wrap our heads around, for our bureaucracies to wrap their heads around, because we're so used to all the different boxes. So an example of kind of where you might run into this is the state resources might say you have to have this is also, I think, not really responsive to rural communities either. But a state resource might say you need to have your transit committee sign off on this, in order to build X amount of housing units. Well, there's no transit community. And so then the conversation needs to be, well, can we have the tribal council, which is the authority, sign? And that requires a waiver because that's not the transit authority. And so even those little things make it so hard and so difficult to access that many tribes have just given up on trying to access those resources at that level. So I think that's just one small example. I think the other piece that's really interesting in terms of direct kind of conflict is a conversation of recapture. And we understand that as you're deploying federal dollars, you want to have a way to ensure those dollars are underwritten, or as a bank, before close, they can take back. But we have to recognize that this is on tribal land. And so you can't really foreclose on a property in the same way, because that land, and be similar also to being in a community land trust, is entrusted to the tribe. And so there are things like that I think are subtle, but create real obstacles for tribes accessing those dollars.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think that's absolutely right. And too often, I think federal and state agencies treat tribal governments as if they are some other form of nonprofit or grantee, rather than appreciating that government-to-government relationship. And so it's a real challenge we have to keep working on.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and for providing excellent testimony. I want to let my colleagues know, for senators who wish to submit questions for the record, those questions are due 1 week from today, which will be Tuesday, April 23rd. For our witnesses, you will have 45 days to respond to any questions for the record. And thank you again. I think we've gotten great input and feedback as we think about legislation that we want to move forward, so I'm grateful for your testimony. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.